I learned patience in the mud of Coronado. I learned how to slow my heart rate down until I was basically a statue, invisible to the naked eye. But sitting in seat 1B, watching my 72-year-old mother tremble in fear, was the hardest test of discipline I have ever faced. I had my hoodie pulled low, headphones on, dark sunglasses covering my eyes. To the rest of the world, I was just some exhausted traveler passed out before takeoff. To the man walking down the aisle, I didn't even exist. But I was watching. I am always watching. The first-class cabin smelled like expensive leather and old money. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you afraid to breathe too loud. My mother, Loretta, was sitting in seat 1A. She looked so small against the massive reclining chair. She was rubbing her knees, nervously clutching that worn-out leather purse she's carried to church every Sunday for 10 years. She had never flown up front before. I wanted this to be special for her. I wanted her to feel like a queen for once in her life. She kept looking around with these wide, innocent eyes, terrified she was going to break something. Then, the atmosphere shifted. I felt it before I heard it. The air got heavier. Richard Sterling stepped onto the plane. I could smell the arrogance on him from 3 rows away. Expensive cologne, tailored Italian suit, and the kind of sneer that says he hasn't heard the word no in 20 years. He stopped right at row 1. He didn't look at his boarding pass. He looked at my mother. And the look on his face wasn't just annoyance. It was pure, unfiltered disgust. Like he had just stepped in something filthy on the sidewalk. I tensed up under my hoodie. My muscles coiled. I ran a quick threat assessment in my head. Male. 6'2". Roughly 200 pounds. No visible weapon, but his hands were clenched. Hostile intent confirmed. He didn't speak to her. He didn't even acknowledge her humanity. He snapped his fingers at the flight attendant, a sharp, cracking sound that cut through the cabin silence. "Get this help out of my seat," he said. His voice was loud, performative. He wanted an audience. First class is for paying customers, not the cleaning staff. Why is she sitting there? My mother flinched like she'd been slapped. She shrank back into the seat, trying to make herself invisible. Her hands were shaking so bad she could barely find the zipper on her purse. I have a ticket, sir," she whispered. Her voice was trembling. "My daughter, she upgraded me." She pulled out the boarding pass, offering it to him like a peace offering. She was smiling that nervous, polite smile she uses when she's scared. She just wanted him to see that she belonged there. That was his chance to walk away. That was his chance to apologize. Instead, he escalated. He didn't look at the ticket. He looked at her hand. And then, with a speed that triggered every combat reflex in my body, he swatted her hand away. It was a violent, dismissive slap. Her boarding pass fluttered to the floor. "I don't care about your affirmative action ticket," he spat, leaning over her, invading her personal space until he was inches from her face. "I paid $3,000 for this seat. I am not sitting next to someone who looks like they just came from scrubbing floors. Pick up your trash and move to the back of the plane before I drag you there myself." My mother gasped, holding her hand where he struck her. She looked terrified. Tears were welling up in her eyes. She looked around for help, but the flight attendant was frozen in shock. Sterling reached out. He grabbed the fabric of my mother's coat. He was actually going to put his hands on her. He was going to physically remove an elderly woman because he thought she was weak. Because he thought she was alone. He had no idea what was sitting 5 feet away from him. He had no idea that he had just signed his own death warrant. I took a deep breath, uncurled my fingers, and prepared to break his world apart. I didn't move. I didn't twitch. In the teams, they teach you that stillness is a weapon. If you don't move, you don't exist. Under the shadow of my hoodie, my eyes were wide open, tracking his every motion in the reflection of the darkened window. I regulated my breathing, forcing it into the slow, rhythmic pattern of deep sleep. To him, I was just another exhausted passenger checking out of reality. I was a non-factor. I was background noise. But inside my head, I was already running the tactical geometry of the cabin. Distance to target, 4 feet. Obstacles, 1 armrest. Threat level, critical. I was just waiting for the line to be crossed. Every man like him has a line. Once he crosses it, he enters my world. The flight attendant tried to step in. She was young, maybe 24, and she was clearly terrified. She put a hand out, trying to de-escalate, trying to do her job. "Sir, please," she stammered. "You cannot touch another passenger. I need you to." He didn't let her finish. He spun on her, looming over her with pure physical intimidation. "Don't you dare tell me what I can do," he snarled, spitting the words into her face. "I own companies worth more than this entire airline. I will have your job before we even touch the tarmac. Go get the captain or shut your mouth." She froze. The color drained from her face. She stepped back, defeated. He had cleared the perimeter. He had neutralized the only authority figure in the room. He smirked, turning his back on her. He thought he had won. He thought he was the apex predator in this metal tube. He had no idea he was standing next to a jagged rock. He turned his attention back to my mother. The verbal abuse wasn't enough for him anymore. He needed to dominate. He needed to inflict pain. "If you won't walk back there," he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl, "then I'll drag you." My mother pushed herself back into the leather seat, trying to merge with the upholstery. She looked so fragile. "Please," she whispered. "I can't, my legs." He didn't listen. He lunged. It happened in slow motion for me. His hand, thick and heavy, clamped onto the shoulder of her wool coat. He didn't just grab her, he yanked her. It was a violent, jerking motion meant to hurt. I heard the fabric of her coat tear. My mother let out a sharp cry of pain, a sound that tore through my discipline like a bullet. Her walking cane, the one she relied on for every single step, slipped from her trembling fingers. It clattered loudly against the floor and rolled out of reach. She was helpless. She was crying, clutching her shoulder, looking at him with absolute terror. "Stop making a scene," he shouted. And then he did it. He raised his right hand high above his head. Palm open, fingers spread. He was winding up. He was actually going to strike a 72-year-old woman in the face. That was the line. The rules of engagement had been met. Hostile act confirmed. Imminent threat to a civilian confirmed. The switch in my brain flipped from observe to execute. My heart rate didn't speed up, it slowed down. The cabin noise faded away. All I saw was his exposed wrist. All I saw was the target. The time for sleeping was over. 5 seconds. That's usually the window you have to change the outcome of a catastrophic event. But I didn't need 5 seconds. I needed less than 1. As his hand descended, accelerating toward my mother's terrified face, I breached the threshold of the seat. I didn't telegraph the movement. I didn't wind up. I simply exploded from absolute stillness into maximum kinetic violence. My right hand shot out from under the heavy cotton of my hoodie, a blur of motion that the human eye couldn't track. I intercepted his wrist 3 inches before it made contact with her cheek. The sound of the impact was dull and heavy, meat striking meat. I caught him with a talon grip, my fingers digging into the tender pressure points between his radius and ulna. I clamped down with enough psi to crush a padlock. He froze. For a microsecond, his brain couldn't process the data. One moment, he was the dominant force, swinging at a defenseless old woman. The next, his arm had hit an immovable object. He looked down at his wrist, confused, watching his momentum die instantly against my grip. He tried to pull back, to yank his arm free, but I had already locked the joint. I had him. I didn't stand up yet. I used the leverage of the seat to anchor my core. With a sharp, mechanical twist, I rotated his wrist outward, forcing his elbow to flare up, compromising his center of gravity. Anatomy is just geometry. If you control the angle, you control the man. I applied torque, and his knees buckled. A gasp of shock replaced the sneer on his face. Then, slowly, deliberately, I used my free hand to pull back my hood. The cabin air felt cold against my skin. I turned my head and looked up at him. I didn't blink. I didn't grimace. I gave him the 1,000-yard stare, the look you get after you've seen things that don't belong in a civilized world. I wanted him to see my eyes. I wanted him to see the complete absence of fear. I wanted him to realize, in the deepest, most primal part of his brain, that he had just made a fatal tactical error. He saw it. I watched his pupils dilate. I watched the blood drain from his face as the realization hit him. He wasn't dealing with a sleeping passenger. He was dealing with a predator. Mistake, I whispered. I stood up. I moved into his personal space, invading it, dominating it. I didn't let go of his wrist. Instead, I drove forward, using my body weight to force him backward. He stumbled, his expensive Italian loafers slipping on the carpet, until his back slammed hard against the bulkhead wall. He was pinned. Trapped. He opened his mouth to scream, to threaten, to say something stupid, but I didn't give him the bandwidth. I stepped through his guard, placing my left hand on his tricep, just above the elbow joint. I had his wrist locked in my right hand, his upper arm pinned with my left. His elbow was the fulcrum. My body was the lever. I didn't hesitate. You don't hesitate when you neutralize a threat. You finish it. I looked him dead in the eye as I executed the break. I drove his wrist down while snapping his elbow up. The sound was sickeningly loud in the quiet cabin. A sharp, dry crack, like a tree branch snapping in a winter storm. It was the sound of the olecranon process shattering, of ligaments tearing apart under impossible tension. I hyperextended the joint 40 degrees past its natural limit. Time seemed to resume at normal speed. The air left his lungs in a ragged, agonizing shriek. His knees gave out completely, and, because I was still holding his destroyed arm, I controlled his descent. I guided him down, forcing him to his knees in the aisle, right at my mother's feet. He curled in on himself, clutching the ruined limb, vibrating with shock and pain. The arrogance was gone. The power was gone. All that was left was a broken man on the floor, weeping in front of the woman he tried to hurt. The scream that came out of him was jagged and wet, the sound of a man whose reality had just been violently rearranged. He clutched his shattered arm to his chest, rocking back and forth on the expensive carpet, his face a mask of red, sweaty agony. But even with the broken bone, the ego didn't die. It was almost impressive how quickly his entitlement kicked back in. He looked up at me, spit flying from his mouth, his eyes bulging with rage. "You're dead," he shrieked, his voice cracking. "I'll sue you for everything you have. Do you know who I am? I run this city. I'll have you thrown in a hole so deep you'll never see the sun again." Behind me, the flight attendant finally found her voice. She was shouting now, panicked, verging on hysteria. "Stop. Oh my God, stop. You can't do this. I'm calling the captain." I tuned her out. In a combat scenario, you filter out the white noise and focus on the asset. Sterling was no longer a rude passenger. He was a secured target who hadn't realized he was captured yet. I didn't panic. My pulse didn't even jump. I simply reached into the front kangaroo pocket of my hoodie. I didn't pull out a weapon. I pulled out two heavy-duty, military-grade flex cuffs, thick black plastic zip ties designed to restrain a 200-pound insurgent. I grabbed Sterling by the collar of his $3,000 suit and spun him around. He tried to resist, tried to kick out, but with one arm useless and his center of gravity gone, he was as weak as a child. I slammed his chest against the metal railing of the seat structure. I kicked his legs apart, forcing him flat. I looped the zip ties around his good wrist and the metal stanchion of the seat, ratcheting the plastic tight. Zip zip. The sound was final. He was tethered to the aircraft like luggage. I leaned in close to his ear. I wanted to be the only one he heard. I dropped my voice to a whisper, cold and intimate. "I know exactly who you are, Mr. Sterling," I said. He froze. His thrashing stopped instantly. "Or should I call you by your handle?" I continued, letting the words sink in. "The accountant." I felt his body go rigid under my hand. The pain in his arm was forgotten, replaced by a much colder, deeper terror. He turned his head, looking at me not with anger, but with the dawning realization of a trapped rat. He knew that name. He knew that only a handful of people in the intelligence community knew that name. I stood up and turned to face the cabin. The silence was absolute. Every passenger in first class was staring at me, terrified. They saw a woman in a hoodie who had just crippled a man. They thought I was a psycho. They thought this was a violent crime. I needed to control the narrative immediately. I needed to secure the room. I straightened my posture, pulling my shoulders back, projecting my voice with the command presence of a commissioned officer. "Lieutenant Jordan King, United States Navy," I announced. The authority in my voice hit them like a physical wave. Everyone remained seated. I pointed a finger at the man sobbing on the floor. "This man is not a businessman. He is a fugitive level 3 target wanted for laundering $50 million for the Sinaloa cartel. He is responsible for moving blood money across 3 borders." Gasps rippled through the cabin. The flight attendant covered her mouth. The look of disgust on the passengers' faces shifted from me to him. I had stripped away his camouflage. He wasn't a powerful victim anymore. He was a monster. I looked down at Sterling. He was shaking, tears streaming down his face, realizing his life was over. I had been a ghost to him for 3 weeks. I had tracked him through safe houses in Europe, through shell companies in the Caymans, all the way to this flight. "I've been tracking you for 21 days, I told him, loud enough for the back row to hear. "I was on your 6 when you checked in. I was behind you at security. My orders were to wait for us to land in Los Angeles so I could hand you over to the feds quietly. I was going to let you have your last few hours of freedom." I glanced down at my mother. She was still trembling, clutching her bruised shoulder, looking up at me with wide, wet eyes. I looked back at Sterling, and for the first time, I let a crack of pure, personal anger show through the professional veneer. "You could have flown in peace," I said, my voice dropping to a growl. "But you just had to touch my mother." The flight deck door unlatched with a heavy mechanical thud. The captain stepped out, filling the narrow aisle. He was a big man, ex-Air Force by the look of him, and he had that specific tension in his jaw that meant he was ready to put someone down to protect his ship. He took one look at the scene, the blood on the carpet, the man zip-tied to the seat structure, the weeping flight attendant, and his eyes locked onto me. He didn't see a hero. He saw a hijacker. He shifted his weight, preparing to engage. I didn't give him the chance to make a mistake. I knew the protocol. I kept my hands visible, palms open, away from my waist. "Captain," I said, my voice steady, cutting through the ambient noise of the engines. "Status is secure. Threat is neutralized." I moved my right hand slowly to my back pocket. The captain flinched, but I pulled out the leather wallet and flipped it open. The heavy metal badge caught the cabin lights. The golden trident, the eagle, the anchor, the pistol gleamed against the leather. It's a symbol that changes the temperature of any room. It speaks a language that men like the captain understand instantly. It says that the violence wasn't criminal, it was sanctioned. He squinted at the credentials, then looked at me, really seeing me for the first time. The tension drained out of his shoulders. The bar fight was over. The national security operation had just begun. He nodded, a sharp, curt dip of his chin. Understood, Lieutenant. Do you require assistance? Negative, Captain, I replied. Just radio law enforcement at LAX. Tell them the package is wrapped and ready for pickup. On the floor, Sterling was still trying to salvage his ego. He was thrashing against the plastic cuffs, screaming about lawsuits, about his connections, about how he was going to have my career. He was loud, incoherent, and annoying. He was disturbing the peace of the cabin, and more importantly, he was upsetting my mother. I looked at the flight attendant. Do you have duct tape? She nodded, fumbling in a drawer in the galley, and handed me a roll of silver heavy-duty tape. I knelt beside Sterling. I didn't say a word. I just ripped off a 6-inch strip. He saw it coming and tried to turn his head, but I grabbed his jaw, squeezed his cheeks to force his mouth shut, and applied the tape. The silence that followed was beautiful. All that was left was the muffled sound of his pathetic whining through his nose. I stood up and surveyed the cabin one last time. The atmosphere had shifted completely. 5 minutes ago, these people were looking at my mother like she was a nuisance, an intruder in their exclusive club. Now, they were looking at her with something else entirely. They looked from the broken man on the floor to the frail old woman in the seat, and they realized that she wasn't just some old lady. She was the mother of a reaper. A woman in a business suit 2 rows back gave a small, respectful nod. The hierarchy of the cabin had been rewritten. The man with the money was trash. The woman with the cane was royalty. I sat back down in seat 1B. The adrenaline was already fading, replaced by the familiar cold calm. I pulled my hood back up, retreating into the gray. I turned to my mother. She was still trembling, staring at the man on the floor, then at me. She looked terrified, not of him anymore, but of what I had just done. She had never seen me work. She knew I was in the Navy, but she thought I pushed papers or organized drills. She didn't know I broke people. I reached out. My hand, the same hand that had just snapped a man's elbow like a twig, was steady and gentle. I took her shaking fingers in mine. Her skin felt paper-thin, so delicate. I squeezed it softly, grounding her, bringing her back to me. I'm sorry about the noise, Mama, I whispered, my voice soft, just for her. He won't bother you again. She squeezed my hand back, a weak, tentative grip. She took a deep breath, looked at the flight attendant, and with a shaky hand, reached for the glass of champagne that had been sitting on her tray table the whole time. Go back to sleep, baby, she whispered back. I leaned my head against the window, closing my eyes. Below us, the man who owned the city was curled up on the floor in a fetal position, weeping into the carpet. Above him, Mrs. Loretta King took a sip of her drink, looking out the window at the clouds, untouchable. We had 4 hours to Los Angeles. It was going to be a smooth flight. I didn't hesitate when my mother needed me. But the sad truth is, everyone else in that cabin just watched. They let it happen because it was easier to look away than to stand up. Now I'm looking at you. Are you a protector, or are you just another spectator? If you would destroy anyone who dared to touch your mother, hit that like button and subscribe right now. But if you're the kind of coward who would sit there and let an old lady get hurt, keep scrolling. We don't need you in this battalion.